Okay, thank you very much, team. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am Firehiwot Sentayehu. I'm a professional research fellow for water for accountability program from Ethiopia, and I work at Addis Ababa University. And today I'll be sharing some of my findings from this research, which I'm conducting as part of the Water for Accountability program. And the title is Water Licensing and Stakeholders Relationships over Al-Waer Dam Governance, Accountability Gaps, Effects, and Prospects. So next slide. So I will be focusing on these three issues when I talk about the management of Al-Waer Dam. So to give a brief overview of the Al-Waer Dam, the Al-Waer Dam was built in the 1980s on the Al-Waer River, but it was never utilized for the purpose that it was constructed for, which was basically to irrigate 10,000 hectares of land. However, in 2009, the government of Ethiopia gave the permit to utilize the waters of the water from Al-Waer Dam to cultivate 10,000 hectares of land in the downstream. So basically what I looked into is regarding what were the accountability issues when this dam the permit to use this dam was given to a company in discussion, which is Saudi Star PLC. So basically the presentation looks into some of the accountability gaps when the water permit was granted. And we also conduct some power analysis to look into the type of relationships that we see between the community and government, and also stakeholder relations. So the next slide. So when we look at the accountability gaps, the findings of the research takes us to community consultation, because it's a mechanism that's put as a way of engaging the community, or also holding government organs accountable in terms of involving the community and also considering the needs of the community while looking into the water management, dam management, because the community in this particular area is highly relying on the Al-Waer Dam for its water use, basically for food, for fishing, to cultivate crops, vegetable, and also for cleaning purposes. Despite the promises that are made as per the legislation of the country, the policy of the country, the community was not really consulted when water permit was actually provided to the Saudi Star to make use of the water of Al-Waer Dam for irrigation. And this is mainly because of weak enforcement mechanisms, because the proclamation, there is an environmental impact assessment proclamation that the government has designed, and it's part of the country's legislation. However, when it comes to enforcement, it's not really being enforced, as I saw from the findings of the research during the data collection. And this is mainly because of these weak enforcement mechanisms, which has to do with, for example, lack of directives to implement the proclamation. And also the sanctions are not really that strict. So a particular company can just pay a certain amount of money and avoid the environmental impact assessment process. The third one is uncoordinated government structures, because we're operating in a federal government structure system. There are institutions, government institutions with mandates of, for example, provision of water licensing at the federal level, at the regional level, going through the local level of government. But these different levels are not really working in a coordinated manner. And this is partly why the proclamation is not being enforced, and community members are not really participating in the decision makings of the government as intended by the proclamation, by the legislation, as I was saying earlier. Next slide. Looking at power analysis, basically to see the power relations between government and the local community. The findings show that government does not really involve community in decision making, and there is an obvious kind of power imbalance between the community and government. The community does not really ask the government, demand the government so that they can involve in decision making, and also from the government side, the very mechanism of involving community in decision making, which is community consultation, is not really taken seriously. And even when we look at the government's actions regarding, when some disagreements arise between the company and the government, the company and the community, there is a tendency to be biased towards the company's interests. And this is particularly observed regarding relations between the community and the company, particularly with regard to employment. And this power imbalance is partly because of lack of community organizations, because in many rural settings, advantage is having, for example, indigenous type of community organizations that can be used for various purposes, including in dam management in this particular case, and water management of different sorts in others. But in this particular instance, those institutions are not really present. So the community is not really organized to demand for its right, to demand its involvement, to demand responsiveness from the government. And one only type of power that was observed is an invisible one, which is this community residing in this part of the Alwero Dam, informing other communities elsewhere in the region regarding how they have not really benefited from the dam. So in that process, my informants from government also told me that communities elsewhere, particularly on the Gilo River, resisted the construction of dam on the river, because they heard from the community here that they have not really benefited from the Alwero Dam. But apart from that, the community does not really have power to influence decision making of the government in general. Next slide. So stakeholder relations, as I was saying also earlier, we see dealing kind of horizontal accountability institutions. So the horizontal accountability institutions that are basically the only ones that seem to operate in this particular case are not really linked. As I was saying, at the federal level, we have the Environmental Protection Authority, and at the regional level, this dam is located in the Gambela National Regional State. There is a bureau for, again, environmental protection. But these two are not really working together. They don't have mechanisms to report and to follow up on these activities. So that's kind of a major challenge, and that's what we observe. And similarly, the water management sector offices are not really working harmoniously because the water management sector offices, the ministries at the federal level, for example, they don't really inform, according to my informants, they don't inform the regional bureau when feasibility studies, for example, are conducted. And in these types of kind of delinked or unharmonized activities, the community resists, and the community is also not informed, because the regional authorities are much closer to the community as compared to the ministries. Weak networks of vertical accountability, as I was saying, the community is not really organized, and in addition, civil society organizations are not really there to work on water accountability. So they may work on some activities, for example, establishing cooperatives and so on, but they don't really work on empowering the community to demand for its rights, specifically reference to water management, dam management. So this is also a gap when talking about vertical accountability. Next slide. So when we look at conclusion, the community, as I'm saying, is regarded as a passive actor, both because the community is not organized and as a result not demanding for its own rights, and also because the government also regards community as a passive actor. And this is partly because of the extreme kind of emphasis on economic growth by disregarding other aspects of development, like the local community and also the environment at large. However, there is a need to work on accountability. It's really important as part of the democratic process, part of fulfilling mandates of government institutions. And for this to happen, we need to really work on enforcement mechanisms as well as coordination across the board at different levels of the government structures. Thank you very much.